I used to think toughness was the only thing that mattered. Growing up, my father had drilled it into me. Men don't cry, men don't show weakness, men fight back. So when my own son, Nathan, came home from school with teary eyes and shaky hands, my instinct was to bark at him. Stop being soft, I told him, sharper than I intended. His little shoulders hunched, and he nodded quickly, like he'd failed some secret test of mine. At the time, I thought I was doing him a favor, preparing him for the world. But then there was that boy. I first noticed him on the edge of the playground while waiting to pick up Nathan. The other kids ran wild in a tangle of laughter and sneakers, but this boy sat alone on a bench, holding something crumpled in his lap, a faded scarf, too big for him, like it belonged to someone else. His hair was messy, his clothes worn, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were like trapped animals. There was a stillness about him that didn't fit with the chaos of children. That night, Nathan mentioned him, said the boy's name was Daniel, and that some of the kids teased him. He added that Daniel never fought back. Instead, he just sat there, silent, taking it. My reaction was automatic. Well, maybe he should toughen up. You don't want to be like that. Nathan went quiet, pushing peas around his plate. I didn't realize then how much those words would come back to haunt me. The next week, it happened. A scuffle broke out near the bike racks after school. I was walking up just as I saw Nathan standing beside Daniel, trying to defend him from a group of older boys. My chest swelled with pride for half a second, until I saw Daniel's sleeve rip and the skin beneath. The scars were raw, jagged, and unmistakable. They weren't the kind a child gets from climbing trees or falling off bikes. They were the kind you don't want to imagine on a child at all. In that instant, my breath caught. My throat closed. Every word I'd ever thrown at my son about being soft came crashing back like a verdict against me. And standing there, frozen, I realized this wasn't just about toughness. It was about survival, about compassion, about what kind of father, what kind of man I wanted to be. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't teaching your child to fight. It's teaching yourself to listen. The image of those scars wouldn't leave me. That night, after putting Nathan to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table, my dinner untouched, and the house unusually quiet. My wife, Claire, noticed my distance and finally asked what was wrong. I hesitated. How could I explain it? The sight of another child's pain had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. But eventually, the words spilled out. Claire's fork froze midair. Scars? On his arms. Her eyes softened with a sadness that told me she already understood something I didn't. She worked part-time at the community center, where she occasionally heard whispers about families in trouble, homes that weren't safe. You think his parents? I asked, but my voice broke halfway through. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she sighed and placed her hand over mine. Not every child gets to grow up with love, David. That thought gnawed at me. I had spent years preaching resilience to Nathan, thinking strength was built by shutting out softness. But what if softness was the very thing that could save someone like Daniel? The next few days, I paid closer attention. Whenever I picked Nathan up, I noticed Daniel hovering near the edges, never laughing, always clutching that scarf like it was a shield. And then, the detail I couldn't ignore. Every time his sleeve slipped, he tugged it back in a hurry, like he was hiding the truth from the world. Nathan, though, had noticed everything. He began sitting with Daniel at lunch, sharing his sandwich, telling me small stories about him. He likes pigeons, Nathan said once, with a seriousness that made me smile. He feeds them crumbs every day, says they're his only friends. The scarf, the pigeons, the silence. Puzzle pieces I didn't yet know how to put together. One evening, as I tucked Nathan in, he looked at me with eyes too old for his age. Dad, am I soft if I help him? His question hit me harder than any rebuke. Because in that moment, I saw the boy I was raising. Not the hardened shell I had once thought necessary, but a child brave enough to care. And quietly, a thought grew inside me. Maybe compassion wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the strongest thing of all. It is a strange thing to realize your child might already be wiser than you. The turning point came the following Monday. I was dropping Nathan off at school when his teacher, Mrs. Ellis, asked if she could speak to me privately. She was a kind woman in her 50s with a voice that always seemed to carry both firmness and care. That morning, though, her expression was grave. It's about Daniel, she said softly. We're keeping an eye on him. But it's complicated. Her words hung in the air, heavy with things unsaid. I nodded, but I felt my chest tighten. I noticed, I admitted. The scars. Mrs. Ellis lowered her gaze, confirming without confirming. He's very withdrawn. It's hard to get him to open up. The school can only do so much without proof. That word, proof, cut through me. So there it was. An unspoken rule. You could suspect, you could worry, but unless a child spoke or someone saw, your hands were tied. I hated that answer, but I understood. On the way home, Nathan sat in the back seat, unusually quiet. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "Dad, Daniel told me a secret." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "What kind of secret?" He said, "Sometimes when it gets really bad, he goes to the park. You know, the one with the pigeons. He says it's the only place he feels safe." The park. I could picture it. The old stone fountain, the benches lined with peeling paint, the way pigeons flocked the square at any given hour. That's where Daniel disappeared when the weight became too much. That scarf he always clutched must have been his talisman, his link to someone who once gave him comfort. Now I faced my own test, though I couldn't name it fully yet. Do I step in, risking overstepping boundaries, maybe even pushing Daniel further into silence? Or do I stay back, telling myself it isn't my business, and let the system grind slowly while a boy suffers in plain sight? Nathan's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. He didn't say anything else, but the look was enough. It was a silent plea, and it was also a challenge. The unspoken rule of fatherhood is this: your children will notice whether you act with courage or whether you look away. And sometimes, the real test isn't about teaching them who to become. It's about proving who you are. The next Saturday, Nathan asked if we could go to the park. He didn't say why, but I already knew. I agreed, half expecting to see Daniel there, though part of me hoped I wouldn't. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what that might mean. The park was quiet that morning, leaves scattered across the pathways, pigeons fluttering low as though they belonged more to that place than the people did. Nathan ran ahead, clutching a bag of breadcrumbs he had insisted we bring. And sure enough, sitting on a bench near the fountain, was Daniel. The same scarf wrapped around his neck, the same watchful eyes. Nathan plopped down beside him, chattering away about pigeons, while I kept a careful distance on another bench. I pretended to be reading the newspaper, though my eyes stayed fixed on them. Daniel barely spoke, but he listened, his shoulders loosening just a little each time Nathan laughed. It was then I noticed something curious. Daniel would occasionally reach into his pocket, pulling out scraps of folded paper. He'd stare at them for a while, then tuck them back quickly whenever anyone passed by. From where I sat, I could just make out faint lines of handwriting. Letters, maybe? Drawings? It struck me as both secretive and deeply important to him. When Nathan's bag of breadcrumbs ran out, he offered Daniel the last handful. For the first time, I saw the boy's lips twitch upward, not quite a smile, but something close. He accepted, scattering crumbs gently, almost ceremonially, as if feeding the pigeons were a ritual. Later, walking home, Nathan finally said it out loud. He showed me one of the papers. It was a note from his mom. She used to write them for him, before she left. I stopped in my tracks. Left? Nathan's small voice dropped even lower. He said she went away and never came back. He keeps the notes so he doesn't forget her. The scarf, the pigeons, the secret papers. They weren't random at all. They were fragments of love he was desperately holding on to, relics of safety in a life where safety no longer lived. I felt the weight of it like a stone pressing against my ribs. I wanted to scoop the boy up, shield him, promise him it would all be okay. But I wasn't his father. I wasn't even family. All I had was proximity, and the question of whether that was enough. Life sometimes hands you puzzles not to solve them perfectly, but to see if you'll lean closer instead of turning away. It was a gray afternoon when everything shifted. I had gone to the park again, this time without Nathan. I told myself I was just taking a walk, but the truth was, I couldn't get Daniel out of my mind. Something inside me kept pulling me back to that bench by the fountain. Sure enough, there he was. Alone. The scarf wound tightly around his neck, his fingers fiddling with one of those folded notes. I hesitated before approaching, unsure if he'd shut down or run away. But when I sat down a little distance from him, he didn't move. He just kept staring at the pigeons. After a long silence, I finally said, "They always come back, don't they? No matter how many times you chase them, pigeons return." Daniel's eyes flickered toward me, cautious, then back to the birds. "Because they know where home is," he whispered. His words cut me deeper than I expected. I let them sit between us, like something too sacred to disturb. Eventually, he unfolded the note in his hands, holding it with the care of a treasure. The paper was wrinkled and yellowed at the edges, but I could still make out a few words in neat handwriting. Be brave, my boy. Love, Mom. I swallowed hard. That's from her. Daniel nodded, his jaw tightening. She left me the scarf too. When she was still, before she was gone. His voice cracked, and for the first time, I understood what those scars really meant. They weren't just wounds on his arms. They were echoes of nights spent alone, of pain inflicted where comfort should have been. And here was the revelation that broke something inside me. The boy wasn't weak. He wasn't soft. He was surviving the unthinkable with nothing but scraps of paper and an old scarf to keep him tethered to love. All the while, I had been teaching my own son to toughen up, as though hardness could shield him from life. But Daniel showed me the truth. Hardness wasn't strength. It was armor that cracked under real weight. Strength was in holding on to love, even when everything around you tried to tear it away. Sitting beside that boy, I realized my son had already chosen the better path. Compassion wasn't a flaw in him. It was a legacy I needed to honor, not correct. Sometimes life reveals its lessons not through triumphs, but through the quiet endurance of someone the world overlooks. After that day at the park, I couldn't unsee what I'd learned. Every detail about Daniel's life carried new weight. The scarf he clutched wasn't just an accessory, it was armor. The notes weren't childish keepsakes, they were survival. And the pigeons weren't just birds. They were witnesses, silent companions to a boy who had too few. But knowing the truth didn't make things easier. It made them harder. Nathan became more entangled with Daniel, and I saw how deeply he cared. One afternoon, he came home upset. Dad, the boys were picking on Daniel again. They took his scarf and threw it in the mud. Nathan's fists were clenched, his voice trembling with anger. I wanted to fight them, but Daniel begged me not to. He said it would only make things worse. That night, I scrubbed at the stain on the scarf myself, the muddy fabric heavy in my hands. It wasn't just a piece of cloth anymore. It felt like a lifeline. And as I worked, I wrestled with my own helplessness. If I stepped in too strongly, I could scare Daniel off. If I stayed silent, I risked teaching my son that kindness had no power in the face of cruelty. The complications didn't stop there. One evening, I saw Daniel's father at pickup. A tall man, sharp suit, cold eyes. He spoke curtly to the teacher, hand gripping Daniel's shoulder with just enough force to make my stomach turn. The boy shrank under his touch. My instincts screamed at me to intervene, but I had no evidence, only scars and silence. Claire noticed the change in me. You're carrying this, she said gently one night as we lay in bed. But David, you can't save everyone. Her words were true, but incomplete. I didn't want to save everyone. I wanted to save him. And then the worst complication of all, Nathan asked if Daniel could come over after school. My first reaction was yes, of course, let's give him one day of safety. But then my mind raced ahead. What if his father disapproved? What if Daniel told him? What if we made things worse for him at home by trying to help? I felt like I was walking through a maze, every choice a potential dead end. Protect Daniel, protect Nathan, protect our own family. And yet, doing nothing felt like the greatest betrayal of all. The scarf lay drying on the chair by the fire that night, its colors dimmed but not destroyed. And I couldn't shake the thought. Maybe compassion wasn't only about feeling. Maybe it demanded risk. Kindness, I was learning, isn't safe. It's costly, and that's why it matters. The day everything came to a head was colder than it should have been for spring. Nathan came running out of school, panic in his eyes. Dad, come quick. It's Daniel. I didn't think, I just ran. Around the side of the school building, near the bike racks, a group of older boys had cornered him. One had snatched the scarf again, holding it high like a trophy, while another shoved Daniel against the fence. He didn't fight back, he never did. He just curled into himself, arms crossed, desperate to hide. And then I saw it. His sleeve slipped, exposing those scars again, angry and raw against pale skin. The boys froze for half a second, startled, but then the cruelest one sneered. Look, no wonder he's such a freak. That was it. Something inside me snapped. I stormed forward, my voice echoing louder than I'd ever heard it. Enough. The boys scattered at the sight of me, dropping the scarf in the dirt as they bolted. I bent down, picked it up, and shook off the dust before draping it carefully back over Daniel's shoulders. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground, trembling, silent. "Nathan, go get Mrs. Ellis," I ordered, trying to keep my voice calm. When my son ran off, I crouched to Daniel's level. "You don't deserve this. None of it. Do you hear me?" For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in the faintest voice, he whispered, "They're just like him." I froze. Like who? He didn't say. He didn't have to. The pieces locked together in my mind. The cold father. The silence. The scars. When Mrs. Ellis arrived, she saw the look on my face, the way Daniel clutched the scarf like it was keeping him alive. She nodded once, quietly, as though she, too, understood. She led Daniel away gently, promising to take him inside. That night, I sat in the dark living room long after Nathan had gone to bed. Claire found me there, the scarf still on the chair where I had placed it carefully, almost reverently. I told her everything. About the confrontation, about Daniel's words. "We can't just sit back anymore," I said, my voice shaking with conviction I hadn't felt before. "If we do, we're no better than the ones who look away." The confrontation wasn't just with those boys. It wasn't even with Daniel's father. It was with myself, my old beliefs about toughness, silence, and what it meant to be a man. And in that moment, I knew. True strength wasn't about fighting with fists. It was about standing up when it cost you something. The call came 2 days later. Mrs. Ellis asked if I could come down to the school. My stomach sank the whole drive over, dread gnawing at me. When I arrived, I found her waiting in her office, and beside her sat Daniel, clutching that scarf so tightly his knuckles were white. "David," she said gently, "he asked for you." The words hit me harder than I expected. Me? Not a teacher, not a counselor, me. I sat down slowly, giving Daniel space. He didn't meet my eyes at first, but after a long silence, he finally whispered, "I told them." It took me a moment to understand, but when I did, my throat closed. He had told the truth. About the bruises, the nights locked out, the cruel hands that should have protected him. He had opened the door he'd been terrified to crack, and now there was no going back. Mrs. Ellis explained that the authorities had already been contacted. Steps were in motion. It would not be quick, it would not be easy, but Daniel would no longer be left alone in silence. When she left us for a moment, Daniel finally lifted his head. "They're taking me somewhere else," he said, voice trembling. "I don't know where. I don't know if I'll ever come back." My chest ached. I wanted to promise him everything, that he'd be safe, that he'd be loved, that life would make sense again. But I knew empty promises were just another form of betrayal. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It was something I had written the night before, not knowing if I'd ever get the chance to give it to him. Just a few words in my messy handwriting. "You are braver than you know, and you are not alone." I slid it across the desk to him. He unfolded it carefully, like it might tear in his hands. And for the first time since I'd known him, a single tear rolled down his cheek, not of fear, but of release. Nathan and I went to the park the next day. The pigeons were there, as always, pecking at crumbs, circling the fountain. Nathan scattered the last of his bread and whispered, "Do you think Daniel will come back here one day?" I placed a hand on his shoulder. "I think he'll always carry it with him. This place, those birds, that scarf, they're part of his story now, just like you are." As we walked home, I realized something had changed forever, not just for Daniel, but for me. I had once thought strength meant hardness, but now I saw the truth. The legacy we leave isn't in how tough we pretend to be. It's in the compassion we choose when it matters most. And sometimes, the smallest kindness, a shared sandwich, a note, a washed scarf, becomes the very thing that keeps someone alive. Weeks passed, and life settled back into its rhythms, though there was an empty space where Daniel's quiet presence used to be. The school never shared details. Privacy rules kept everything sealed, but word trickled through careful whispers. He had been placed somewhere safe, away from the man who hurt him. Nathan asked about him often, sometimes at dinner, sometimes before bed. "Do you think he's okay, Dad?" And every time, I answered with the truth I had learned to hold on to. "He's finding his way, son, and he knows he's not alone anymore." One Saturday morning, Nathan and I returned to the park. The pigeons still gathered, greedy and restless, but it felt different without Daniel there. Nathan sat on the bench, the same one where Daniel used to perch, and pulled a folded paper from his pocket. He'd been writing notes of his own now, little messages of encouragement, like the ones Daniel had kept from his mother. He placed one under a rock on the bench. "In case he comes back," Nathan said simply. I couldn't speak for a long moment. My son had turned compassion into an inheritance, something he would carry into the world long after me. I had tried to make him tough, but he had chosen to be kind. And that choice had changed both of us. Walking home, I realized how fragile and fierce kindness really is. It costs something. It risks something. But in the end, it leaves behind a legacy no scar can erase. I don't know if I'll ever see Daniel again. But I know this. A scarf, a sandwich, a note, a park bench. They became more than objects. They became symbols of survival, of love that refuses to die, of strength that doesn't need fists or armor. And as for me, I'm still learning, still unlearning, still trying to be the father my son already deserves. Because at the end of the day, life doesn't test us with how much we can harden. It tests us with how much we can soften without breaking. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't underestimate small acts of kindness. They might seem like crumbs to you, but to someone else, they could be the whole loaf. They could be the reason they make it to tomorrow. And if you believe compassion is the true strength we need more of in this world, share this story. Let it remind someone else today that softness is not weakness. Softness is courage. Sometimes the gentlest hand leaves the deepest mark.